After our grayscale, our next shading exercise is going to be to shade some simple shapes. When you're shading shapes, you don't just stay with one direction of your shading. It is better to follow the direction of the shape to help you create that illusion of form, to create that illusion of 3 dimensions. So what we have here is a cone, a sphere, and a cylinder. Because they're not shaded, they still look very flat. What we're going to try to do is make them look more like their form versions by adding shading. Now, as you can see, there is a light source indicated in the top left-hand corner, and that light would be shining on the top left of each of our shapes, which means the lights are going to be on the left and the darks are going to be on the right. There's also an indication at the bottom of cast shadows. Cast shadows are the shadows that an object casts onto a surface. Like right now, my hand is casting a shadow onto the paper, and that's what we're going to put underneath. Now for each shape, we're going to review those rules of shading, and our goal is, of course, to keep our shading following those rules, which means 10s to 1s, blending, and no smudging. You are required to use a shading pencil for this activity, and you want to make sure that you are using your patience. Now, as a right-hander, I'm going to start with the cone. If you are left-handed, you may want to start with the cylinder, because by starting with this one, my hand's not on top of what I'm doing. After the cone, I'll move to the sphere. After the sphere, then I'll do the cylinder and the cast shadows underneath. Now, for the cone, what I'm going to do is create a grayscale pretty much the entire width of the shape no matter where I am. So I'll have 10s on this side and it'll blend away to the ones on this side. But that'll even happen in the tip. I'm going to have a 10 here and it'll blend away really quickly to the one on the other side, which means that I have to be really careful to blend quickly in that little area. Now at the bottom, my area of 10 is actually behind the sphere, so it might not be a 10 that starts right here. It's going to be whatever matched above. So that's what I'm going to do for this particular shape. Now I am going to use the direction of the shape to help myself out, which means here on the right hand side I'll be shading at the angle. As I work my way to the center, which would be the medium values, then I will change the angle to be more vertical. After the middle values, I'm going to work my way to the lighter values, and again I'm going to change my angle to be more like the left hand side, which is this angle here. So right angle, middle, left angle. Right angle is angled this way, middle is more vertical, left angle is this way. Now I just did one little section so you could see that, but of course I have to do that for the entire shape. I'm going to push those shadows upward to start working toward the tip. And again, keeping in mind that I need to blend really quickly in the tip to be able to get that whole grayscale happening, even in that little tiny area. Just some reminders, the sharper your point is, the smoother your shading will be. The less you push in your number 10s, but layer gradually, the less warping you'll have. And of course there is that trick to hold your pencil way at the end for the light shadows. Now as I work my way down, I'm going to continue that process of bringing those shadows downward. Now notice I'm not doing a band, stopping, doing a next band, stopping, doing a next band. What I'm going to do is try to be a little bit more random with my shading and just kind of push out from what I already have. What this does is lets me avoid that banding that happens when you shade. Now, of course, graphite, especially when it's in its number 10, reflects the light. So as you can see, that reflection shows up because of the way that the lights in my room are. It's always good, though, to pick it up every now and then so you can see what it looks like without the reflection, to see if you are truly getting those number 10s. Now, I like working from dark to light because I find that I can control my shading better that way. However, if you are more comfortable and you are creating better quality by going from light to dark, that is okay. You have to find out what works best for you and then do that thing. Some students don't like when they first start shading because, especially in the lighter values, they can actually see their own pencil strokes. And for some reason, they think that seeing pencil strokes at all is a bad thing. But I feel that it's nice when a drawing looks like a drawing. Yes, there is a style of art called photorealism, and yes, you can work on your art very, very patiently to make it look as detailed and as realistic as a photograph. But you all have cameras in your pockets. Why do we need to draw like photographers when we could just take a picture? Personally, I like my drawings to look like drawings. I like to see textures. I like to see brush strokes. I like to see pencil lines because it makes a drawing look like a drawing. A lot of people can take photos, but not everybody can draw. Not everybody can shade real well. So, be forgiving of yourself. It is perfectly okay if your drawing looks like a drawing. Now remember, around the sphere, you might have a tendency to want to curve around that edge. However, you're following the shape of the cone. You're not following the shape of the sphere. So your shading should still be straight. I do find it's easier to get edges by using circular shading rather than continuing with my perfectly straight shading as I get closer to that edge. So it gives you a little bit extra control over the edge of your shading. All right, the finished cone, as you can see, goes from the number 10s on this side. The shading gets lighter and lighter and lighter and changes direction in the middle. And then as it goes toward the number 1s, it is angling that left hand angle to the number 1s on this side. So each section, whether it's just the tip or just the bottom, has that 10 to 1 rule. Also, between the 10s and the 1s, there's no definite lines of shading, so it does have that infinite range of grays, that blending quality that we want. I've avoided banding, I've avoided warping the page, I've avoided smudging because I was using magazine paper under my hand, and I have the cone finished. Now here is an example of what not to do. As you can see, the banding that happens from the darks to the lights, you can count the shadows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Also, notice that the light source is at that bottom corner down here, and the darks are in the top right, and then the number 1s are just in this bottom left. That does not create that illusion of form that follows the shape. So we want it more like this one and not like this one. The next shape that we're going to shade is the sphere. This one's going to require a few little tricks, a few little things to help it look like a sphere instead of just a flat circle. First thing to note is your light source. The light is actually toward the viewer and angled back. So the light is not just hitting right on the edge of the sphere, it's actually hitting a little bit on the front surface. So the number 1s are going to be in a little oval right here. The shading should follow the curve of the shape to give you that illusion of a sphere. Now, here's a tricky thing. As a right-hander, my hand, when I shade, creates a natural curve. Whether I'm pivoting at the fingers, it's a shorter curve, or if I'm pivoting at the wrist, it's a bigger curve. Thing is, the curve is not going the right direction for this sphere. I need this curve, not this curve. Bad thing is, this is going to be very difficult for my hand to do while keeping it smooth. So the trick is to actually turn the page so you can use the curve of your hand in the correct angle. That means, unfortunately, that my hand may be on top of the cone that I've already done. That makes my magazine paper much more important. Now, if my hand is on the magazine paper and shading, this will help prevent the oils of my hands from picking up the graphites and moving them around the page. But here's one issue. If your hand is on the magazine paper and as you shade, you move the magazine paper, the friction, even though this is glossy, smooth paper, the friction will still smudge your shading that you already have. So the goal is to keep this one still. You can hold it with your hand, keep it still, and just move your hand. Now, one of the easiest ways that I've found to use the sphere is to actually think about Shakespeare's Globe. Shakespeare's Globe Theater, as you can see, was not a circle. Even though people said that it was a circle, it wasn't a circle. It was actually comprised of about 20 different straight sides. And because there were 20 different straight sides, it looked like it curved. So in this situation, what we can do is actually create a grayscale all the way, turn the paper a little bit, and then create a next grayscale. Turn the paper a little bit and keep going. In this manner, you can shade that circle without trying to loop around the whole thing at once, which is not a very easy thing to do. First thing I'm going to do is determine where my ones are going to be and make sure that I don't touch inside of the ones. If I touch inside of the ones, I'm losing that particular row. I am not following that particular rule, which is that every good shading drawing ranges from 10s to 1s. If I lose my 1s, I mess up that rule. So, turned my sketchbook, and then I'm going to use that curve of my hand, and I'm going to create a grayscale that goes from the edge of the sphere to the hot spot, to the number 1. I'm going to let my edges stay a bit soft. This is going to help me to blend one area to the next when I turn my page to do my next little area of grayscaling. Building up my 10s gradually so I don't warp the page, and using that slight curve of my hand. When I start my second little area of grayscale, I'm just changing that angle slightly to help myself get that curve. But instead of one big curve, it was one here, one here. Because I'm changing that angle, it lets me create that curve a little bit more easily. Now notice how I constantly work back into the original grayscale so that I can blend the two together without creating that banding that would happen if I just overlap the edges. Now your number 10s are not going to come all the way up the sides of the sphere. So in this area, maybe starting with a 7 type of value. Slightly darker than halfway, but not all the way to a number 10. Notice I still want to blend one to the other, even though that angle is changing from this angle here to this angle here. So it all happens gradually. Now some 2s and 3s will wrap around that hot spot a little bit on the top. It's not going to be pure white all the way to the edge. But you do want to blend the way to that hot spot fairly quickly. And you can use that trick of holding your pencil all the way in the end to get those really, really light shadows. I'm coming back to my original grayscale, turning the page a little further counterclockwise so I can work on this next little area here. because this is the area opposite of the hot spot of the number ones. That would be that darkest area. Now, as you can see, on the finished sphere, my 10s are in this region, and as it lightens, it still curves around to the highlighted region, which is here. These are the number ones. Remember, for the number ones, don't touch them. Now, as you can see in this diagram, shading a sphere is actually a bit more complicated than this, because as the light would hit the surface, it would actually reflect a little bit onto the bottom of it. It's not a pure grayscale like we're doing here, but this is just a beginning exercise, and we're practicing getting those basic rules, 10s to 1s, an infinite range of grays in between, no smudging, and this time while following a shape. If your shadows follow a shape, it makes it easier to create that illusion of 3 dimensions. Now, our last shape that we're going to mess with is going to be the cylinder. The cylinder is the closest one that we've had to just a grayscale. We're going to start with our number 10s here on the right, and we're going to work our way to the number 1s on the left. Now, you could shade with a curve going horizontally, but it's harder to get the darks to go to the lights like that. It is much easier if you're shading vertically to blend to those lighter shadows. Now, the top is getting hit not directly by the light, but it is facing it pretty much. So we are just going to put a light shadow on the top of the cylinder, like a 2 or a 3. It's just going to be a flat shadow all the way across. I'm going to hold my pencil at the end to do that top section. Just a reminder that the more randomly I shade, just bringing shadows out from what I've already done, the less banding I'll end up with. And using a circular motion near an edge helps you to actually control your pencil a little bit more easily to shade on that edge. Reminder, if you see a definite stopping point of one shadow and a definite line that separates it from the next shadow, that is not blending. You need to continue to work on that edge to get your shadows to all blend gradually. After shading your 3 shapes, going from those rules of 10s to 1s with blending in between and no smudging, then your next step would be the cast shadows beneath. Your cast shadows are the shadows that the shapes would cast onto the surface that they're sitting because they're blocking the light. Now, a cast shadow doesn't follow that 10 to 1 rule and doesn't have to have all the way from number 10s to number 1s. A cast shadow is darkest right underneath the shape itself and then blends out to a medium shadow, like a number 5, throughout the remainder of it, and then blends away right at the edges. Now you notice that the line of the drawing right here shows through. We want to try to avoid that, but because this was a copied image, we can't get rid of that line. Another trick, a tip when working with surfaces is your stroke this time doesn't follow the shape because the shape itself is horizontal. So you could turn this sideways to make it easier for your hand to shade horizontally for the entire thing. This helps give the illusion that it's sitting on a surface a little bit more easily. This works for ground, this works for tables, counters. It also very much works for water. If you're ever shading water, please make sure that you're shading horizontally to help give that illusion of the water. The artwork that someone is paying you for, you do want to be very careful with your artworks to avoid those kinds of things. On an exercise like this, not the end of the world, but if it's excessive, that's just carelessness and it will lower your grade. So, our finished product has basic shading of 3 forms which are three-dimensional versions of shapes. You have the cone, you have the sphere, you have the cylinder. Each shape goes from 10 to 1, 10s to 1s, and 10s to 1s. The top of the cylinder has a light shadow from like a 2 or a 3, and the cast shadows underneath are a medium shadow, maybe a 5, darkest right under the shapes themselves, mostly just staying a 5 throughout the main thing, and then blending out the edges a little bit all the way to the ends. And this is what you would photograph and turn in for the assignment.